Hey everyone, so on this episode of Make It with Calvin, we're actually going to be working on the model train layout here in the wonderful outdoors, complete with the gardeners next door, doing some leaf blowing, so ignore that, but let's dive into the project. So to give you a little bit of backstory on this, right here is a warehouse building. It does have a window at the end, has a door at the front, and also has some LED lighting. That'll be a whole nother topic. But next to it is this, which is what I'm calling the tank farm. So here we have a custom rail car. If you guys are interested in that, I can do an episode on it. But right here we have a rectangular tank that is on top of it's actually pink foam. And this was actually not done by me. This was done by a member of the model train community I'm a part of. It's really nice, but I wanted to have a separate tank. I'm thinking this one will be maybe water or diesel fuel or heating oil, something like that. And then this guy right here, well, I'm not exactly sure what is going to go there, but I'm thinking it needs to be something tiny. Now, poking around online, I found a lot of really interesting tank shapes, and I ended up going with this. It's just a simple rectangular tank with a fill port and that sort of stuff. Now the nice thing about it is you can also drop it onto this here little flat car, and we have ourselves a nice little tank. And I make it a little wider, but the point is it needs to be shallow because this building's shallow, that is shallow, and that is shallow because along the back here will be a nice backdrop to separate the scenes. That's a whole nother topic, but the point is it needs to be shallow to fit in with the scene. So took a couple of iterations to get to this point, but let's go jump inside where it's hopefully quieter, and we'll work on showing you how I went about designing this in Fusion, throwing it on the printer, getting it painted, doing a little bit of weathering, which I haven't done yet, and tying the whole scene together. Oh, and just so you know, blue foam is superior to pink foam. Always will be. I need to get myself some more. All right, let's go inside. All right, so here we are in good old Fusion 360. So to start off this project, I obviously started on the top plane and drew up the basic shape that we see here. So I just did a center rectangle from the origin, pulled it out, gave it the radiuses on the corners, and then when that was done, I offset it to create the wall thickness here, as that is what got pulled up there to create the walls. Now obviously there's no point in printing this tank solid. It would take way too long, take way too much material, and there's just no point in that. So with that drawn, I came along and just activated the top sketch. Then I just pulled the middle part down. I did a 16/7 inch. I find that works good for both commercial and home printing. So with that, we have our very basic tank shape, but we now want to come along, and I decided to add this lip right here. Now this was on some tanks, this was not on all of them. The point is this lip stopped excess fluid from dripping on the ground. Whoever gets this, if they don't like it, it's very easy to come along and fill the area in with a little filler or some styrene or both. The point is I figured it's a little visual detail that it doesn't hurt to add it, so why not? So with that, we then came along and used the same technique that we did for the body to make the filler. We just did a center rectangle. I made a construction line here across the middle, radius the edges, and I know what you're saying, well, why didn't you hollow that out? Well, the reason why is because if I did that, I would then need to put supports on the inside, but by having it completely flat, I can run it without supports and it works fine. So just something to keep in mind there. Also, if I was doing this in a commercial setting, I might hollow that out, but I really don't know how much of a price difference it would make, and the added time involved probably would negate it. So unless I was making like 1,000 of them, probably not worth it. So to create the top was pretty simple. I just took the sketch that was there, I offset it, and that created the top. Now, because I'm trying to avoid using supports, and the reality is the underside of this would look like absolute trash if I tried to print it even with supports. It's not worth it. I came along and I added this nice little chamfer at the bottom. Now, when you're looking at it from the side, you barely even notice it, because when you're looking at it like this, you can't really see it. So that's a good trick in a hobby setting. If you have a thin offset and you can get away doing it, do that. It really, really helps the printing process. So that being done, I then came along and decided to add some rivet details. So what I did is I just drew a small circle, and one thing that I did do is I did make it so that it protruded equally on both sides. The reason why is when it came to the curved areas, there was going to be a ridiculously tiny contact patch that was actually going to be part of the model, and it was creating issues with printing it. So by doing that, I ensured that the rivet was actually going to be attached to the model, and it wasn't going to cause me any issues. So that being said, I came along and I gave it a nice little fillet. And the reality is the rivet is not going to print exactly how you see it, even in a commercial setting, especially considering that I get my prints polished in a commercial setting, and in a hobby setting, it's only going to be so accurate. But it gives enough visual texture that, hey, there's a rivet there. That's really all we need. And in reality, this tank is sitting outside. It's probably a bit weathered. It probably has 100 layers of paint on it to keep it from rusting, things like that. So it does not need to be perfect. For the distance people are going to see it from, it's more than adequate. So then what I did is I came along and, I drew a rivet on the top and bottom. I forgot to mention that. I then came along and did a pattern on a path. Now this is a really powerful tool if you can get it to work right. And let me get it open here. And what that allowed me to do was to take those two rivets, and the path that I chose was the bottom of the tank here. And I gave it a spacing that looked visually pretty good. And then I just pretty much figured out how many of them I had to do to make it go around. Now, alternatively, I could have done an extent, or if I'd known the total distance that I had to cover, could have done it that way. Then again, this, like I've said before, it's purely for visual sake. So if there's a little bit of a gapping difference, it's not going to be anything anybody's going to notice. So the other thing I did do is most of these tanks also had baffles inside and bracing for the different panel segments. So I came along and just did a rectangular pattern on the vertical axis here, and selected the existing rivets and did the same eyeballing it method, and it worked. Then I came along and combined everything so it now sees it as one model, and hey presto, here is the finished product. So this is currently what's on the printer right now. So we'll jump to the time lapse of that, then we'll come back and talk about finishing it and all that good stuff. Okay, so here we have our tank, and this is a slightly earlier version that does not have rivets all the way along the back, but that is no big deal. We are not going to worry about that. We're going to use a combination of what I like to call wet, which would be the hunter line, and dry, which is these weathering powders to weather it up. So the first step is I'm just going to shake up the hunter line a little bit, unscrew the lid, and I'm not going to use that much of it. I'm just going to put a little bit on my brush here, and then I'm just going to kind of just loosely dab it on around the rivets. I don't want to go insane with it. Just want it to more highlight the riveted areas, but however it turns out. But yeah, we'll just kind of do that. Just kind of go around it. And I don't expect this to be a very visible rust, if you will, but that's kind of the whole point. And I'm definitely going to blot some to the top here because you would definitely get some rust up there. You kind of have to say to yourself, where would the rust most likely congregate? And that's what I'm going to focus on. So we'll cap that up before I spill it. You can definitely tell against the white plate here, it's definitely a rusty color. So I'm not seeing too much yet, but we'll see. So I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll come on back and we'll use those guys. All right, so you might or might not be able to see it because the lighting out here is a bit crazy, but here is the finished tank. Remind yourself, that's what it started out life as, that's what it ended up as. So I ended up doing the dry weathering powders off camera just because trying to do them on camera was a bit of a mess. I will say that the hunter line rust, at least on this, did not show up as well as I thought, but you know what? It's all an experiment. The actual effect was very muted, which would be good if that's what you were after. In my case, I wanted it a little more visible, especially for the cameras. But yeah, that is the process of, taking the tank and weathering it. Now, if you are interested in these, they sell for $8 for the first tank, $5 for every tank after that, and if you order 3, they're $15. So if you're curious, drop me a message and I'll be happy to send them out. These are nice because they are very easy to make. They're a very nice little detail item, and you know what? It's a good little modeling project. So, hope you guys found this interesting, and as for me, I need to work on finishing up the old setup here. It needs a little love. So, until then, see you next time on Make It with Calvin. And that's how it'll work.